Well, cool. We're going to get you started right away, David.
Okay.
Erin, do you have something to read for him?
I do. So David Drake is our speaker today. He is a professor and extension wildlife specialist in the Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His research and extension programs primarily focus on wildlife and wildlife damage management in human-dominated landscapes. David received his PhD in forestry from North Carolina State University, an MS degree in wildlife and fisheries sciences from Texas A&M University, and a BA degree in biology from Macalester College. So welcome, David, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Erin. Thanks for inviting me, everybody. And Erin, just a quick housekeeping. Do you still want me to try to finish by 1?
We end at 1:15. So
1:15, okay.
Yep.
Okay, all right, excellent. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for having me here today. And I'm sorry that we can't all be in person. I'm sure we're all sorry for that, but it is what it is. So I'd just like to share with you a bit of a quick overview of a project we've had going on here in Madison since 2014, where we live trap and radio collar red foxes, that animal on the left, and coyotes, that animal on the right. And as you can see from all the names down there, this is an extremely collaborative project. And so I've got multiple graduate students and collaborators and other people like that. And at the end of the presentation, I'll share another slide just so you can see the broad and tremendous support that we have for this project and is necessary for this project to succeed. So just a very brief background on both of these animals. These are in the canid family, so they're related to your domestic dog. In Wisconsin, we have 4 canids, wild canids, the gray wolf or timber wolf, the same animal, coyotes, red fox, and then gray fox. And for coyotes and red fox, there probably is not a city in North America that both of these species do not occupy or have not colonized. And one of the reasons that they're able to do that is because they're habitat generalists. They can utilize a wide variety of land cover, land uses. They're diet generalists, although we consider them carnivores. They do certainly eat a lot of meat, but they also eat a lot of trash and pet cats and out of your garden and trash and all sorts of other things like that, in addition to grasses and insects and things like that. So their incredible adaptability allows them to move across quite a bit of North America, including into cities. And there's a lot of information known about urban coyotes. The longest running urban coyote project in the world is down in Chicago, and that started in about year 2000. There's not much known about urban red foxes in North America. There's quite a bit known about foxes in Europe, but we're not sure how well that transfers to North America. So there's not much known about urban red foxes in North America, and there's very, very little known about these two animals and their relationship in the urban area. There's quite a bit known of their relationship in the rural area. And so typically, in rural areas where you have coyotes and fox that overlap, and these animals, they will utilize the same type of habitat. Because the coyote's about 3 times the physical size of a red fox, the coyotes will exclude red foxes from those areas so that they don't have to compete with the red foxes for somewhat limited resources, be it food or space or whatever the case might be. Things we wanted to look at early on when we started this project was to look at the spatial ecology of red foxes and coyotes in an urban setting like Madison. And specifically, we wanted to see if that relationship held up in urban areas as it's reported in the literature in rural areas where coyotes will competitively exclude red foxes from areas that coyotes occupy. So that's one of our objectives. We also wanted to look, and these are the next couple of objectives are just evolving objectives as we've been running this project. The second objective is generally we wanted to see how healthy these animals were from a disease perspective. And the third objective that I'm going to talk about today is focused solely on coyotes, and it's looking at that coyote-human interaction, because there's a lot of concern from human beings, especially in cities, when they see a coyote as to what that coyote is doing, and does it pose any risk to humans, adults and kids, as well as domestic pets. So those are kind of the 3 things I'd like to talk about a little bit today as just kind of a brief overview of some of our research. So this is our study area. Generally, we cover the west and southern part of Madison, so the western half of Madison, if you will. And even though this is our study area, it doesn't mean that the animals stay in the study area. They're not always obedient. So we've got animals that will track outside of Madison. We've had animals that will track outside Madison, come back, and things like that. But we've had coyotes go over toward Mazamani. We've had them go down toward Belleville. I had a project briefly in Milwaukee, just as a side story, a number of years ago, where we were just ear tagging, live trapping and ear tagging coyotes in Milwaukee. And one of those coyotes showed up at Chicago O'Hare Airport. So that's about, as a straight line distance, that's about an 83-mile jaunt that particular coyote went on. So they will move great distances. And we actually had a coyote that we trapped a couple winters ago out of the UW Arboretum that actually got caught on a recreational trapper's trap line up in Rush Lake, Wisconsin, which is about 70 miles northeast of here. So they will move, but typically they stay within the study area that you see highlighted right here. The other thing I'm just going to quickly talk about with this is that we do a lot of spatial analysis to see where these animals are actually, how these animals are using our study area. And so that's what all the different colors on this map relate to, is different types of land use and land cover that we will start kind of tying that land use, land cover back to spatial movements by these animals. And I may allude to that a little bit today, depending on how much time I have. It's a brief explanation about what we do and how we catch these animals and the methods we use. Starting in the upper left-hand picture there, you'll see that is a type of trap we use. It's called a cable restraint trap. It's a live trap. This is the only type of trap we use for these animals. We could also catch them on a foothold trap, but we tend not to do that in our study. So we use live the cable restraints. The animal, and that's not normally where we would set that cable because it's just too open, too naked. The animal would see it easily. This is for more photographic purposes. But we'll set that cable in a camouflaged area along a trail that the coyote or a fox is using, and they'll set their head, or they'll put their head through that cable. And then when their shoulders touch the cable will tighten up around their neck. And I equate this, or this is analogous, this type of trap we use is analogous to a choke collar you might use walking your dog. So when that dog is pulling against a leash, that choke collar tightens around the neck. But when the dog starts heeling next to you, then that choke collar will lessen. And that's the same thing that this type of trap operates on, that same principle. So as the animal's fighting against the trap, it will tighten only to a certain extent around the animal's neck. And when the animal finally quits fighting against the trap, then that trap will start to lessen or loosen around the animal's neck. So moving to that top right picture, once we've caught an animal, and we check traps every single morning that we trap. Typically we trap anywhere between November 1st and the end of March. So anywhere in that area we'll trap, mostly in the winter. When we catch an animal, we'll come, as is being demonstrated in that upper right-hand picture, and we'll control the animal's head with a pull noose, and then somebody else will go behind that animal and hand inject a sedative into the animal's back leg. And once we've injected the animal, then we'll back off away from that animal. We'll take the pull noose off of its neck, back away for about 10 minutes, let the sedative work, and then we'll move down to this lower right-hand picture. Once the animal's sedated, we will look at its eyes to see about the general health of the animal's eyes. We look at its teeth for kind of a gross aging of the animal. We look at the overall body condition, and then we put a muzzle on the animal. So if it wakes up while we're still trying to process the animal, we can safely resedate it without worrying about getting bit. We weigh the animal, we sex the animal, and then as in the lower right-hand picture here, we draw about 6 cc's of blood out of every animal we trap. And then moving over to the lower left-hand picture, we will swab the animal's nasal passage with a Q-tip, and then we'll take another Q-tip and we'll swab the animal's rectal passage. And then after we've done all that, we'll put a radio collar on the animal, and we tailor fit each radio collar to that animal. And the radio collar you see here is a VHF, or very high frequency radio collar, which required our students to go out and radio track that animal. So each time we wanted to find an animal, we would have to go out, as Stephen in the lower right-hand corner is demonstrating here. We would go out with this antenna and the receiver, and we'd find each one of these animals. And we would do that with the VHF collars. We would find each animal for a 5-hour period once a week. So we'd have 5 hourly locations in each animal once a week. Now we're using satellite collars, and so for the coyotes, we can get 8 hourly fixes a night of the year. For foxes, we get 4 hourly fixes a night every night of the year. And the reason we get half the number of fixes for the fox collar is because that collar is not as big and it doesn't carry as big of a battery pack. So we're trying to stretch the life of the battery for each collar out to about 2 years if we can. All right, so I'm going to jump into some of our results and getting back to that first objective. My Marcus, he was looking at spatial ecology or the spatial and temporal overlap of these two species. And again, as a reminder, if you look in the literature, the historic and pretty common description of these two animals in non-urban areas is that the foxes will avoid the coyotes because the coyotes will competitively exclude the foxes. And if the foxes don't obey that relationship, typically coyotes will catch them and they'll kill them to limit competition. So we wanted to see if that type of a relationship was holding up in urban areas. And I'm going to kind of have to skip ahead here. I'm going to skip to, I think, what are 3 of the most interesting pictures we've ever gotten on this project. But to set this context up, this that you see in the upper left-hand corner of this picture, that is a garage, a 2-car garage that's in the Regent neighborhood of Madison. And under this 2-car garage, we had a active fox den. And so we're looking here at the back side of the garage, and there's a den entrance on the back side. And then on the side of the garage, there was also a den entrance. And we had wildlife cameras in both entrances just to document the comings and goings of the fox family. Well, in one of the episodes of looking at the SD card and all the pictures we were getting, we found this extremely interesting set of pictures. And to explain it now, that animal you see in the upper part of the garage, or right along the garage, that's a coyote. And that coyote is radio collared. It was an animal we caught out of Lakeshore Preserve on campus about a mile away. And that coyote has come over and has found this fox den. What you can't see right now, or you can't see very well, is if you look just on the downside of that coyote, there's a big mound of soil, and that's been excavated out to create that fox den. And on the lower end of the mound, you might see a kind of a linear object going up the mound. That's the red fox. That's the male red fox who owns that den. So he's the animal who has he's the dominant male, and he's bred the dominant female. And the dominant female is inside this den with 3 fox kits at the time of this happening. All right, so the coyote has come over. The fox is looking at the coyote. Now the coyote is actually sniffing into the den entrance, and the fox is actually sniffing the coyote, as you can see here. And this fox is also collared. You can see a black line down the middle of that animal's shoulder blades. That's the antenna for the collar. This is highly unusual, and we published a paper on this. And it was one of the first papers that has been published on the fact that these animals can coexist in urban areas, both in the same space and the same time. And at any time that this coyote wanted to, he could have whipped around and caught that fox and killed the fox at any given time he wanted to. He never did that. And this is the next set of pictures we saw in the sequence. Is now that's the dominant male fox with the black backs of the ears. The coyote is up on top of the mound by the fox den. And these two are just looking at each other for about 10-minute period of time. We had, as this was going on, we had these wildlife cameras in each entrance, and just coincidentally, we had a film crew with us for about 2 weeks, and we stationed them at this house. And so we had about 3.5 weeks of both video and still photography. And what we found out what was going on here is this coyote would come over by itself, or sometimes it would bring a pack mate with it. So sometimes we'd see 2 coyotes at one time, and they would come over to this fox den every other night for about 3 to 4 weeks. And what they ended up doing is the dominant male fox and the helper fox, they would bring whole rabbits and whole squirrels back and leave them at the entrance of the fox den, both for the dominant female, the vixen who was bred, but also for the 3 fox kits, so they could learn how to hunt and learn how to tear apart meat and things like that. It turns out the coyotes were coming over for a free meal. So they would come over every other night, grab a rabbit or a squirrel, sit down about 10 feet away, 10 meters away, eat the prey, and then they go on their way. And then they would come back 2 nights later, and they would do this routinely for about 3 to 4 weeks. At no time did the coyotes ever make an aggressive maneuver toward the fox. And these fox are not going to jeopardize the kits. And we knew of at least 4 other fox dens in this fox family's territory that they could have moved the fox kits to. And they have moved the fox kits in previous years. So it told us that because the fox family never moved their kits out of this den, they continue to use this den, even though the coyotes were coming over every other night, that the fox were not threatened by the coyotes, and the coyotes weren't making any aggressive maneuvers. So what we think is happening in these urban areas, at least in Madison, and we think Madison is not necessarily unique, is that these animals are able to coexist both in space and at the same space and same time, simply because there's so much food available in that urban landscape that these animals can share a very abundant resource. They don't have to expend energy to competitively exclude other species like red fox like they do in non-urban areas. And I'll talk a brief bit about that in just a minute. All right, so that's the first objective. The second objective is we wanted to look at generally how healthy these animals are from a disease standpoint. And our hypothesis, one, was that these animals are going to be extremely disease-ridden because they interact with so many different animals, be it dogs or raccoons or possums or skunks or other coyotes, whatever the case is. Or an alternative hypothesis would be that these animals are going to be very healthy from a disease standpoint because they're so healthy from a nutritional standpoint, and typically the more nutritionally healthy you are, the more immune healthy you are. So it looks like from all of our disease work here that most of the diseases we monitored for or we looked at, that starting all the diseases in the black font, none of those diseases were very interesting. There was nothing interesting about it. There was no story to tell in the data. There was no trends in the data or anything like that. There were no trends in the data. But the two top diseases that you see, heartworm and Lyme, those were definitely species-specific diseases. And so coyotes, as you can see there, about a third of the coyotes that we tested for heartworm tested positive. And we tested 14 coyotes, as you can see in the parentheses there. None of our red fox that we tested, and we tested 15 of those, tested positive for heartworm. Heartworm obviously is a mosquito-borne disease. Lyme disease, about 2/3 of our coyotes tested positive for Lyme disease, and only one of our fox tested positive for Lyme disease. So there's definitely a species-specific difference going on here that was very interesting and was statistically significant as well. And so what we think is happening here is the way that these animals set up in these urban environments is relatively different. And so that red fox you see in the left-hand picture there, foxes spend a lot of their time in what we call the human-dominated landscape or that human-built landscape. So they spend a lot of their time where we live, either within our neighborhoods or pocket parks or moving through our area. But they're in a much more open, more built environment than the coyotes are. As you can see, that there is a coyote in that picture in the lower right-hand picture there, and that's in the UW Arboretum. And coyotes tend to spend most of their time in these urban green spaces like what you see in this lower right-hand picture there. And fox don't. And so what we think is happening here is because coyotes are spending so much time in these urban green spaces, which is much better tick habitat and it's much better mosquito habitat, whereas fox are spending their time in the human-dominated landscapes where we don't have a lot of good tick habitat. Water runs off the landscape into our storm sewers, so we don't have standing water around a lot. And because fox are associated much more frequently with humans than the coyotes are, and humans typically don't tolerate or like mosquitoes or ticks very much, so we tend to get rid of those where we live. So we think that red fox are not as susceptible to both heartworm and Lyme disease simply because they're associating themselves more with the human-built environment than coyotes are. And coyotes just, in that environment, the coyotes are in these urban green spaces, they're just much more susceptible to ticks and much more susceptible to mosquitoes. So that's kind of an interesting story from a disease standpoint. And the last thing I want to talk about, which is a little bit different methodology than what I've already covered, is we wanted to look at human coyote encounters in Madison, Wisconsin here. And as part of our project, in addition to all the field methodology we do, we have a iNaturals page, which is a citizen science reporting portal on the website. And under the iNaturals umbrella, you can define a species-specific page for iNaturals, which we've done for our UW Urban Canid Project. So anytime somebody alerts us that they saw a coyote or a fox in Madison, we point them to our iNaturals page and ask them to please report it on that iNaturals page. And so we have this wonderful opportunity to actually capture firsthand and have first-person encounters about accounts of human coyote encounters. And so in addition to asking each person who's reported a coyote encounter for us, we asked them what time of the day or night did that encounter occur. We asked them to geo-reference it. So we have GPS data or latitude, longitude data on where that encounter occurred. We also have the date that that encounter occurred. And then we ask each person who reports the encounter to answer 7 optional questions. And some of the questions included, did the coyote see you? Did you have a dog with you? If the coyote saw you, did it move away from you? And things of that nature. And so essentially what we've done is we've got all these different variables on each individual human coyote encounter. And we've actually captured that and summarized it, but we also did some statistical modeling. So I'm just going to share a couple of the more interesting results with you. But one of the things we asked each person to report to us is estimate the level of aggression of that coyote that you encountered on a 0 to 5 scale. So 0 is the coyote was completely calm. I didn't feel threatened at all from that coyote. And 5 would be the coyote was very, very aggressive, and the coyote came at me, or the coyote tried to attack me, or something of that nature. So we in this paper that we're publishing, we report about almost 400 human coyote encounters. Now we don't have 400 coyotes in the city of Madison, so there are multiple coyotes that are encountering either the same human being multiple times or different human beings. So a lot of their 400 reports are of the same coyote. However, when most of the people who estimated the aggression, 90% of those the people estimated coyote aggression as 0. And if you include 1, the number 1, that would get us up to 97% of the encounters are either 0 or 1. So by and far, almost all of the encounters are benign. And I think the highest level of aggression that was ever estimated so far is, I think, a 3. And there was one of those, and I think there was 2 or 3 number 2s that were reported. But by and far, overwhelmingly, most of the human coyote encounters are innocent and benign. The other thing I'll just quickly talk about, one of the things that we monitor quite closely here in Madison is when people are encountering coyotes, what is the behavior of that animal? What we want to see is that the coyote moves away from a human being. Now, they may not run away from that human being, but as long as they walk away or move away from the human being, that means that that coyote has a healthy respect or healthy fear for humans. And that's the best thing we can do, is to instill healthy fears of humans in these coyotes, because when they see us, they'll move away from us versus coming to us to attack our pet dog or attack us or whatever the case might be. So a little over half the time, somebody said, yes, the coyote moved away from me when it saw me. And that's exactly what we want to see. We'd like to see that number higher. Do a lot of educating the public about hazing coyotes or scaring them so they do move away from us. That was not something we asked in this survey. We just asked, did the animal move away from you on its own? And we were heartened to see that at least in 55% of the time, that is true. All right, so just to summarize this really quick, by and far, if you encounter a coyote, you don't have to worry about that animal being aggressive toward you at all. It doesn't mean we need to let our guard down or be complacent, but you also don't need to exercise any undue concern that if you see a coyote, something bad is going to come of that. Most of those human coyote encounters occurred during daylight hours, so between sunup and sundown, which is a bit odd because most of the coyote activity is at night. And so most of those encounters we actually captured or people reported about were during sunup or sundown. So that's either when the animal's going back to its area to go to bed, or it's waking up to go out hunting for the evening or patrolling for the evening. And that makes sense because obviously we don't see animals, we don't see very well generally at night. So during the daylight, you have a better opportunity to see the animal. I think the average distance between from where the human coyote encounter occurred in a road was 55 meters. So, and that makes sense as well, because a lot of times people are driving and they might see a coyote off to the side, or they might capture the coyote in their headlights of the car, for example, or they're walking, and those roads provide a lot of very good long distance sight lines, so you can see for a long period of time. And typically off the side of the roads, there's not much vegetation. So that makes some sense as well. And most of the encounters that were reported were during coyote breeding season, so from December to March. And that also makes sense because that's some of the time that the coyotes are most active when they're actually patrolling in an area quite a bit. So they're out and about a lot and are more active than they are during other times of the year. So they'd have a better opportunity to be seen. And as I mentioned, typically it's probably the same coyote is being observed and reported upon by multiple iNaturalist users. All right, so just a couple of other things to share with you really quick, and then if you have questions, I'm happy to answer some questions. Some ongoing research, as I mentioned, that we've been able to demonstrate that coyotes and fox can share the same space at the same time, and they seem to be able to do so in a very positive way, unlike what's demonstrated and reported in non-urban areas. And what we think is allowing that coexistence to occur is that there's just so much of food available in that urban landscape. So my current graduate student is looking at that right now. And what we're going to start doing is trapping small mammals and medium-sized mammals in urban areas like Madison, and then we're going to trap them in non-urban areas out in Iowa County, where we also have coyotes on radio collar as well as red fox. And what we want to see is typically what's the abundance and diversity of the prey base that's available for these animals to eat. And ideally, or the hypothesis is that we're going to see a much higher abundance of prey in urban areas than we do in non-urban areas. But then we're also collecting scat on all these animals that we are tracking and in the areas where we're small mammal trapping. And we want to look at then what are the animals eating relative to what's available for them to eat. So we'll be able to capture then their diet. So that's an ongoing study. As I mentioned, we've been able to document this coexistence where coyotes and fox are interacting with each other in the same space at the same time, and we want to learn more about those interactions. So we're using satellite collars now where we have coyotes and fox on air at the same exact time of the 24-hour clock. And so what we're starting to look at is who is actually initiating that interaction. So are the coyotes moving to where the fox are? Are the fox moving to where the coyotes are? Is it just a random interaction? Where do those interactions occur? Is it inside of animals' territories, outside of animals' territories? And are those interactions consistent throughout the year, or during the pup and kit rearing season when these animals are trying to rear their young, do they become more territorial than other times of the year? So those are some things we're interested in looking at. The last thing that we're looking at right now is a road crossing study. So these animals move around quite a bit, but not every single animal moves the same amount. So we have different variability of movement by individual. And so we have some animals that have a lot of roads that they have to cross within their home range or their territory. And we have other animals that don't have as many roads, even though they still have some roads they have to cross. And so what we're trying to figure out is the more roads an animal has to cross, so they get better at crossing roads, or the more roads that animal has to cross, does that increase their chance of getting hit by a car? And then the other thing we're looking at with this is spatial memory. So are these animals, especially with busy roads or roads that are where they have to cross a lot of roads, if they're successful crossing the roads, those roads, are they always going back to that same crosswalk, or generally are they going back to that same crosswalk because they know that they're more successful getting across the road here than they would be maybe 2 blocks to the west, or whatever the case might be. So we're looking at that now as well, spatial memory and road crossing. These are just some of the people that I've worked with and I've been lucky to work with, or and then have supported our project, either gone out to help us trap, or they help us radio collar or collect radio locations, or whatever the case might be. And so we've got just tremendous amount of support and interest, and we are always grateful for everybody's support. And the last thing I'll just mention quickly is, if you are interested in our project, we have an open Facebook page. It's called UW Urban Canid Project, and so you do not have to be a Facebook user to tap into our project page. We haven't updated it lately, but as we do things that, especially in the trapping season, we update that page multiple times a week, so you can check that out. We've got a lot of, perhaps, I don't know, 5 years worth of stuff on that page you can go through. We have a website that is not as dynamic as our Facebook page, but the website also has some information on there. Our Facebook page doesn't necessarily have. One of those pieces of information is how to coexist with coyotes in the urban areas. And then if you're interested in getting involved in our project, if you do see a coyote or a fox in Madison, in the Madison area, we would really encourage you to go to our iNaturalist page and report that. So you can just Google iNaturalist and UW Urban Canid Project, and our iNaturalist page should pop up. And then it's pretty self-explanatory after that. And then lastly, if you are interested in helping, we are always looking for money. This project cost me about $45,000 a year to run. So we support it by as many grants as we can get. But imagine right now with the COVID-19 situation and everything else going on, grant money is really drying up pretty significantly. So if you're interested, we set up a gift fund page to the UW Foundation, and you can go to UW Foundation, Google our website, or Google our UW Urban Canid Project within the foundation search engine. And then the foundation, if you donate, they'll send you some paperwork indicating that it was a tax-free donation. So any of that would be helpful to us, but obviously not obligated. And thank you so much for having me on. I'm glad to answer some questions if we have time.